Asoka, the great king and missionary, reigned 273 to 232 BC. Far back down the corridor of the years, we perceive the figure of Asoka like an image in a shrine, encrusted with legends. But when these owe their luster to the fire within, to the saintly personality that after 23 centuries illuminates our imagination with the serene radiance of a star, for his life is that of the hero saint, the king who, having all, renounces everything and receives abundance magnified. Again, the triumph of abnegation, the apotheosis of humility. Let us try to deduce from the broken fragments of evidence that are all that remain to us what manner of man he was. We must begin with a legend. It is recounted that the Emperor Asoka was a mighty warrior and hunter, that his dominions extended from horizon to horizon, and that in all the unnumbered leagues over which he held sway, no man was hated more. His iniquities multiplied, and his pride offended heaven, until the day when his guards took hold of a wandering Buddhist saint, and for no other crime save that of poverty cast him alive into a cauldron of boiling filth. But lo, a miracle! For the sage, having taken refuge in the Buddha, was unharmed. The cauldron burst asunder and was transformed into a lotus flower supporting the saint in an attitude of meditation within its brazen petals. The astonished emperor demanded from his prisoner the secret that could thus preserve him in the midst of adversity, offering him in return rewards to the extent of half his kingdom. Then the saint explained that he required nothing at all, but that if the emperor was willing to listen, he would instruct him in the way of perfection. And Asoka humbled himself and became a disciple and lived righteously. And when the time came, when the emperor desired that his kingdom should also enjoy the advantages of the teachings of Buddha, the spirits of the air united in such numbers that the sun itself was darkened, and in a single day built temples or stupas of immeasurable splendor throughout the land. This charming legend contains, as do most legends, the seeds of truth. Whether or not it required such a spectacular miracle to transform the emperor's policy, we have records from Hasoka himself indicating that he undoubtedly did suffer a change of heart. It is probable that he was never such a tyrant or a libertine as the legends would have us believe. That after all is a literacy license that deepens for contrast the colors of every hero. But he was certainly a powerful warrior. His grandfather, the famous Chandragupta, first of the Maurya dynasty, inspired by the example of Alexander, whom legend says he went to visit, set up a great empire soon after Alexander's death, successfully repelled an invasion by Seleucus Nicator, secured his northwest frontier against the Greeks, and then conquered almost the whole of what we know today as British India, a territory along the east coast between the Mahanadi and the Krishna rivers, inhabited by the Kalinga, remained independent. The remaining enormous kingdom he left after 24 years of government and consolidation to his son Bindusara, Amitragata, who reigned for a quarter of a century. At his death, about the year 272 BC, his son Asoka ascended the throne, where for 8 years he reigned very much as his father and grandfather had done before him. He was one of several sons, and it is probable that his father selected him as a Yuvaraja or crown prince, regardless of age or priority, but because of his special ability to govern. During his father's lifetime, he was first viceroy of the northwestern provinces, which embraced the territories west of the Indus, Kashmir, and the Punjab, and then of western India. Its capital was Taxila, a great and glorious city, famous as a center and headquarters of culture. Next, he was viceroy of the western provinces, of which the capital was Ujjain, reputed to be the oldest town in India and a renowned seat of Hindu learning. Asoka's early administrative career was thus spent in two centers of learning, and here he must early have absorbed some part of the principles that remained quiescent until they were activated by later events. According to a Sinhalese legend, Asoka was at Ujjain when the news came of his father's death. The curtain rises on his reign with a visionary procession from Ujjain to Pataliputra, his grandfather's capital, there to be crowned 3 years after his ascension and lift his dynasty out of a darkness into a immortal light. We have no record of the early years of his reign, but we can imagine the constant labor it must have been to maintain order in a domain so vast that the vibrations from the king's accession were enough to cause splits and fissures in its unwieldy structure. The country, however, must have been quiet when, in the ninth year of his reign, the king set out with his armies to conquer the Kalinga people and thus extend his territory from sea to sea. Of that war, we have no exact description. Like all other wars, it was bloody, wasteful, and pointless. Nor can all the panoply of elephants and horsemen and cowhide bucklers and home-rigged bows with arrows 3 yards long make it any more heroic. But it was successful in that the Kalingas were incorporated into Asoka's kingdom, and it marked the turning point in Asoka's life. The horrors of that campaign caused a stirring of the king's conscience. He caused his feelings about the event to be inscribed on a rock face, and for official purposes, henceforth withdrew his name of Asoka and substituted the name Priyadarsin, the humane one. Here is the famous edict. His Majesty King Priyadarsin, in the ninth year of his reign, conquered the Kalingas. 150,000 were thence carried away captive. 100,000 were there slain, and many times the number perished. Ever since the annexation of the Kalingas, His Majesty has zealously protected the law of piety, has been devoted to that law, and has proclaimed its precepts. His Majesty feels remorse on account of the conquest of the Kalingas, because during the subjugation of a previously unconquered country, slaughter, death, and taking away captive of the people necessarily occurred. whereas His Majesty feels profound sorrow and regret. There is, however, another reason for His Majesty feeling still more regret, inasmuch as in such a country dwell Brahmins and ascetics, men of different sects and householders, who all practice obedience to elders, obedience to father and mother, obedience to teachers, proper treatment of friends, acquaintances, comrades, relatives, slaves, and servants, with fidelity of devotion. To such people dwelling in that country happen violence, slaughter, and separation from those they love. Even those persons who are themselves protected retain their affections undiminished. Ruin falls on their friends, acquaintances, comrades, and relatives, and in this way violence is done to the feelings of those who are personally unhurt. All this diffused misery is matter of regret to His Majesty, for there is no country in which are not found countless communities of Brahmins and ascetics, nor is there any country where the people have faith in one sect only. The loss of even the hundredth of thousand part of the persons who were then slain, carried away captive, or done to death in Kalinga would now be a matter of deep regret to His Majesty. Although a man should do him an injury, His Majesty holds that it must be patiently borne, so far as it possibly can be borne. Even upon the forest tribes in his dominions, His Majesty has compassion, though advised to destroy them in detail, and though the power to harm them is in His Majesty's hands. They are bound to this effect: shun evil doing, that ye may escape destruction. For His Majesty desires for all animate beings security, control over the passions, peace of mind, and joyousness. And this is the chiefest conquest, in His Majesty's opinion, the conquest by the law of piety. The conquest by the law of piety was a greater one than anybody realized. The king's change of heart was in itself an astonishing thing, but its effects were even more astonishing. In the year of the Kalinga campaign, he joined a Buddhist community as a lay disciple, and from that time resolved to dedicate his life and all the resources of his position as emperor to the promulgation of this doctrine, which was to bring peace and happiness to his subjects. For 2.5 years, he limited his possessions to the eight essentials: three pieces of yellow cloth for a garment, a girdle to bind, and a needle to mend it, a razor for his head, a strainer lest he should inadvertently destroy life in his drinking water, and a begging bowl. For 2.5 years, lived a curious double life. His entrance into the monastery could not, of course, mean an absolute departure from his life as emperor, and indeed we find that he accomplished his difficult task well, since he was able to absorb his precepts as a disciple and put them into operation as an autocratic ruler. For the first 2 years, he confesses that he displayed little zeal as a convert, and then, towards the end of the 11th year of his reign, his faith received some sudden stimulation, and he records his findings. Work I must for the public benefit, and the root of the matter is in exertion and dispatch of business, than which nothing is more efficacious for the general welfare. And for what do I toll? For no other end than this, that I may discharge my debt to animate beings, and that while I make some happy in this world, they may in the next world gain heaven. I to this end he organized a widespread missionary scheme under the general guidance of his younger brother, Mahinda and his sister Sanghamitra, friend of the church. Preachers in groups of five were sent all over Ceylon, to the kingdoms of South Asia, to Mysore, to the Bombay coast, to the Maratha country, to the Himalayas and Kashmir, and to Pegu. Of those nameless zealots, we know little except that they laid the foundations upon which Buddhism in India securely rests today. From its beginning 2.5 centuries before, as a sect of Buddhism, as a sect of Hinduism, limited in its practice to no more than a part of the Ganges Valley, Buddhism was broadcast over the length and breadth of India in a few years, a scattering that has produced one of the world religions for its harvest. Ceylon was most easily converted, possibly because its king, Tissa, was a personal friend and sympathized with Asoka's ideal, and also on account of the island's previous association with the Buddha. Hence, Asoka's victorious missionaries conveyed with such ceremony a branch of the sacred bo tree from Bodh Gaya, that tree in whose shade the Holy One sat when he achieved enlightenment. But the emperor's altruism was not confined to missionary work. In his own dominions, he tried as best as he could to make them a green and pleasant land. He planted fruit trees and trees valuable for their shade. He organized a system of rest houses at intervals along the roads all over his countries. He caused deep wells to be dug and gave every encouragement to researchers in medicine as well as arranging for families of curative herbs and roots to be easily available for his subjects. By the 13th year of his reign, Asoka's philanthropical fervor was burning at its finest. In order that no one of his subjects should lack the benefits of the new guide to life, the king appointed censors of the law of piety, whose business it was to go about the country as teachers and living exemplars. They were in control of all charitable works and offices. They had power and were encouraged to use it to prevent wrongful imprisonment or punishment, and they watched over and protected the interests of the poor and aged. Commissioners, records the king, have been appointed by me to rule over many 100,000 persons of the people, and to them I have granted independence in the award of honors and penalties, in order that they may in security and without fear perform their duties and bestow welfare and happiness on the people of the country and confer benefits upon them. The commissioners will ascertain the causes of happiness and unhappiness, and will, in accordance with the law of piety, exhort the people of the country that they may gain both this world and the next. My agents, whether of high, low, or middle rank, themselves conform to my teaching and lead the people in the right way, being in a position to recall to duty the fickle minded. Gradually, the fantastic extravagance of the code was abolished, and an ordered regime began. In the 11th year of his reign, the emperor ceased from hunting, and the ban on the slaughter of animals was soon extended to those intended for sacrifice and spread to every four-footed creature, whose carcass is not eaten or otherwise utilized by man. On certain days, the capture of fish was prohibited, and various other detailed specifications concerning the branding and mutilation of animals became law, showing from their wording the care with which each individual case must have been considered. From time to time, he caused edicts to be engraved on rock faces, or in some cases on pillars, throughout his dominions. That these were more than merely public notices is shown by the form in which they are cast and by the fact that, as will be seen below, they contain the essentials of his teachings. It must be assumed that Asoka intended them to be permanent records for posterity. In addition, however, to these fragmentary remains, for we must also infer that the inscriptions are by no means complete. He caused an incredible number of buildings to be erected. One legend ascribes to Asoka the erection of no less than 84,000 stupas, apart from palaces and cities of immeasurable splendor. A stupa was originally designed to enshrine a relic of the Buddha or of a saint, but frequently they were more like cenotaphs, that is to say, empty but built in honor of the illustrious dead. The most famous of these is at Sanchi, and consisted originally of a solid dome of brick and stone, 106 feet in diameter on a cylindrical plinth, 14 feet high, and 117 feet across. On the top was a stone railing, 34 feet across, enclosing a square altar, the whole edifice rising to more than 100 feet. The pillars upon which he carved certain of his edicts were masterpieces of the stonecutter's art, if we are to judge by the two that still stand at Bakira and Navangar, made from a single block of polished sandstone. They rise to an all-over height of 60 and 40 feet respectively, each tapering to a carved abacus on which squats a stone lion. What carvings and architecture remain to us are for the most part stone copies of the original. This explains why the less tractable material develops a lightness and intricacy bordering upon the fantastic. Yet, because of the intrinsic artistry of its creators, the sculpture of Asoka's period never seems over-decorated, and its wildest fancies are always organized and restrained by basic pattern and rhythm. And all this was done in the name of the law of piety. But what was this law? Professor Rhys Davids has summarized it from the edicts, and it will be seen to form the framework of an essentially practical, non religious philosophy. Herein is revealed the quality of the emperor, for his beliefs were founded on basic ethical principles rather than on the forms of worship pertaining to an individual deity. Number 1. No animal may be slaughtered for sacrifice. 2. Tribal feasts in high places are not to be celebrated. 3. Docility to parents is good. 4. Liberality to friends, acquaintances, and relatives, and to Brahmans and recluses is good. 5. Not to injure living beings is good. 6. Economy in expenditure and avoiding disputes is good. 7. Self mastery, purity of heart, gratitude, and fidelity are always possible and excellent, even for the man who is too poor to be able to give largely. 8. People perform rites or ceremonies for luck on occasions of sickness, weddings, childbirth, or on starting on a journey. Corrupt and worthless ceremonies. Now there is a lucky ceremony that may be performed, not worthless like these, but full of fruit, the ceremony of the law, and therein is included right conduct towards slaves and servants. honor towards teachers, self restraint towards living things, rebellion towards Brahmins and recluses. These things and others such as these are the lucky ceremony according to the law. Therefore, should one, whether son or father or brother or master, interfere and say, thus should it be, thus should the ceremony be done to lasting profit. People say liberality is good, but no gift, no aid is so good as giving to others the gift of the law, as aiding others to gain the law. 9. Toleration. Honor should be paid to all, laymen and recluses alike, belonging to other sects. No one should disparage other sects to exalt his own. Self restraint in words is the right thing, and let a man seek rather after the growth in his own sect of the essence of the matter. The law 10. The law is good. But what is the law? The having but little in one's own mind of the intoxications arising from lust, craving after a future life, ignorance, and idle speculations, doing many benefits to others, compassion, liberality, truth, purity. 11. Man sees but his good deeds, saying, this good act have I done. Man sees not all his evil deeds, saying, that bad act have I done, that act is corruption. Such self examination is hard, yet must a man watch over himself, saying, such and such acts lead to corruption, such as brutality, cruelty, anger, and pride. I will zealously see to it that I slander not out of envy. That will be to my advantage in this world, to my advantage, verily in the worlds to come. Only in one edict does he commit himself as it were as an avowed follower of the Buddha. But that, of course, does not mean that other avowals were not made that are now lost. In 249 BC, the 23rd year of his reign, Asoka made a pilgrimage to the holy places in his kingdom. Five huge engraved pillars marked his passage from Pataliputra northwards through Muzaffarpur and Champaran to the foothills of the Himalayas. There he turned westward to erect another pillar at the Lumbini garden, where the Venerable One was born. Hence, his guide and mentor Upagupta conducted the emperor to Kapilavistu, where Buddha spent his childhood, to Sarnath, where the master preached, to Saraswati, where he lived for many years, and to Gaya, where grew that sacred tree, whose branches shaded the master at the dramatic crisis of his life. Finally, they came to Kusinagara, where the Buddha died, and at every place the emperor made oblation, erecting monuments and endowing colleges for the further dissemination of the word. But already the mist of time begin to obscure the glimpses we have of that legendary figure. Like a ruined bridge across a river of unknown breadth, the facts upon which we can erect structures of truth become fewer and more widely spaced. About 242 BC, in the 28th year of Asoka's reign, he took stock of himself and his work. The result was the inscribing of what are now known as the Seven Pillar Edicts. And these inscriptions form a sort of epilogue or postscript to the rock edicts. These are the last words. He reiterates his convictions concerning the law of piety and recapitulates his ordinances concerning the election of the censors, the treatment of animals, and the propagation of the law. About 2 years later, Asoka retired without abdicating from active government. In pursuance of the logic of his creed, and aware that no layman may attain nirvana, the emperor assumed the yellow robe for a second time. He was no longer a lay disciple but a devout subject of the 10 precepts binding upon ordained monks. The administration of his kingdom was carried out by ministers or regents and the Yuvaraja that was to succeed him, although edicts were still issued by his authority. An emperor in monastic robes governed India. That silhouette, stripped of the pomp of royalty, is the last glimpse we have of him. Of the rest of his life, except for the publication of certain supplementary pillar edicts, we know nothing. The last 8 years of his reign are absolutely without record. Only the bare date of his death, 232 BC, has been handed down, and that he was succeeded by two grandsons, Dasaratha, who ruled the eastern, and Samprati, who ruled the western part of his vast kingdom. He had attempted a tremendous task during his lifetime, and it was not his fault that he failed. For Lai led tried to convert his Myrite subjects to his ideas by his own example, and he was too much of a visionary to see that. The opinions he favored with his patronage were enfeebled and corrupted by his favor. While he lived and shone, his empire remained a single unwieldy entity. But after his death, it crumbled and declined, and only half a century was to pass before the Maurya dynasty became extinct. But although Asoka's counsels were, like to many reformers, those of perfection and are more honored than practiced, his personal character has survived across the centuries, and we are able to recognize the humanity, the wisdom, the tolerance, and the sympathy of one of the most striking personalities in the history of the world.